is urbanization good or bad, would you say, for the entire world on a global level?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's really a bad thing, but I mean, just looking at those graphs, like in the future, it's going to keep growing, and it just seems like, I don't know, different cultures could be affected by that, and definitely like environment and stuff like that, and it could end up being a big problem.
Do you think that back in 1950, when only 30% of the population lived in cities, do you think they considered it bad that it was growing that much?
No, I don't think so. I feel like it was a good thing because then it would be good for like business and stuff like that when they were just starting the Industrial Revolution.
And also, the whole thing about, like, culture, yeah, it could be affecting cultures that are currently, like, around or whatever, but it could also be making way for new cultures and new traditions and stuff, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I know it's, like, you think, like, oh, well, we're destroying tradition, but we're also, like, progressing and, like, making new ways to do things, and, I don't know, it could be a good thing.
Why did the Industrial Revolution have such a large effect on the development of urban society, other than the factories?
I mean, at the end of the day, it was because of efficiency occurred. All sectors of life became more efficient, and in that, kind of the traditions of the past and the old ways kind of got lost in the chaos and in the modernization, which is kind of, you know, that ties in really well with our book.
Why do you think urban populations have exploded so much in Asia, more so than America and Europe, the more already developed countries?
Well, they're kind of, you just described our countries as more developed, so I think we went through this explosion like 50 years ago or whatever, so now that they're becoming more developed and they have a lot more people and stuff, that now they're hitting that like rush of like industrialization and stuff like that, and eventually maybe it'll level off like it has in our society.
And also, yeah, maybe because they were behind, they're trying to catch up, so that's why they have such a larger explosion in urbanization. And with the woman in the dunes, is Nikki living in an urban environment in the dunes?
No.
No. Would you say he did when he was a teacher?
Okay. So this is my part, and I'm going to kind of tie urbanization into Japan and the history of Japan. But to start off, we have reasons for urbanization, and this is what Vincent touched on. A first reason is rural to urban migration is happening on a massive scale due to population pressure and lack of resources in rural areas, and this would be considered a push factor since it's pushing them out of the rural areas. And then secondly, people living in rural areas are pulled to the city, so it's a pull factor. Often they believe that the standard of living in urban areas will be much better than in rural areas. They're usually wrong. People also hope for well-paid jobs, the greater opportunities to find casual or informal work, better health care and education. And then a third reason is natural increase caused by a decrease in death rates while birth rates remain high. And then, okay, so let's just talk a little bit about the time period when the heat of urbanization was taking place. It was from 1890 to 1945, and this time period was Imperial Japan, or also known as Tokugawa Japan. And the period was a time of social and economic change within the constitutional monarchy established in 1890. So why did Japan urbanize? And this is because, first of all, the Japanese industry expanded, as Michael and Vincent touched on, because of the Industrial Revolution, both in light export industries like textiles, which were necessary to pay for the raw materials needed from abroad, and also in heavy industries like steel and shipbuilding. Also, cities grew as more Japanese moved from farming jobs into factories and offices. And then in the countryside, larger landlords came to own more and more land, and the number of poor tenants increased as that land increased. And And then Japan has always been dependent on foreign trade, so they were hit very hard by the World Depression that began in 1929. The farmers who had grown the silk that was exported to the U.S. found no market for their product once the Roaring '20s and the craze for silk stockings collapsed, with the stock market crash. And Japan's dramatic economic growth slowed and social problems increased, especially in the countryside. And then here are just some stats to show how big of a deal this was. And as Michael said, in a worldwide perspective, he kind of showed these stats, but the same thing was happening in Japan and in Tokyo, and even to a greater extent. In 1800, Tokyo, which was then called Edo, had a population of about 700,000. In 1900, this had grown to 1.5 million. And by 2003, Tokyo had a population of 35 million, making it the largest urban area in the world. So this just shows how rapid urbanization was happening in Tokyo. And here's a picture of Tokyo in the 1960s right here, and then over there in 2010. You can see a great increase in buildings and stuff. Okay, now some discussion questions. We talked about the first one as a whole, I think, but in Japan, do you think urbanization is good or bad? And I think this can be tied into the second question. If it's good, what can urbanization lead to?
Maybe urbanization was needed because it was so isolated before, and it's on an island, so it's more difficult to access. And I think that it needed to have all the cities and growth of people and industries so that it could succeed in the modern world today.
Good. And the second one, what do you think urbanization can lead to? Or what do you think some benefits or negative effects of urbanization?
Well, I think you touched on it, just overpopulation is a major problem.
And also on the positive side, one thing urbanization does lead to is a greater road system and transportation system, as you have to find ways to get from the main cities out to the countryside and stuff. Okay, do you think it would be easier for one to thrive in an urban setting in Japan or in a rural setting? Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what you think of thriving, because like I personally would not want to live on a farm because I don't see myself like getting up every morning and thriving on milking cows and stuff. But like farmers, I'm sure are like, well, this is my life, this is what I do, this is how I live, this is how I thrive. I think maybe with the culture, I think it's probably easier to thrive in the urban setting just because they're the more progressive of like the rural versus urban in Japan. But I mean, it's up to like that person. Do they think that they can thrive in an urban or rural setting?
Okay. And then counter-urbanization, which is basically the attempt to pull people back out of the cities and kind of restore tradition and stuff, is happening in many modern cities. Do you think this needs to happen in Tokyo as well?
I mean, personally, I think urbanization is what made Japan competitive on the global scale. But at the same time, with urbanization, they've lost a lot of their own culture, Shintoism, and a lot of their ancient traditions were very much based in connection to the natural world, and the idea of living a simple life. Whereas with an urbanization, they're plugging into this global market. And I mean, it probably at this point, similar to what's happening in the Western world now, is probably increasingly mainly the wealthier of the Japanese, but they're probably realizing that it's kind of the opposite of what their ancient tradition has them believe, and slowly kind of turning the tide against it.
When you get your mind like so set on just like, all right, we got to modernize, we got to urbanize, you tend to lose track of like the important things. Like Vincent said, the natural world was like huge to old Japanese traditions, but now it seems to be a thing of the past, something that they've lost, something that they've missed.
And now to tie it in the book, The Woman in the Dunes. On page 1, okay, so to begin off, or to start off, it's kind of throughout, it's like subtlety, but it really culminates in this one discussion, the idea of Abe's anger towards Japan with the man from the village. And it's when he lowered the bucket and the man